Hi, I'm Sheryl Gottschall, and today I'm here with Ben Hurle, who's visiting from Victoria, from the Victorian UFO Action group. And so welcome, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Sheryl. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. So we've got to start at the very beginning where all good stories start.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved in the UFO subject?
Well, basically it did start when I was very, very young. So it's been a lifelong passion and interest from a very, very early age. So I don't think there really has been a moment in my life where UFOs have not been a part of my consciousness on all levels. As a child and to this very day, I spend all my time looking up.
Yeah.
So I'm always studying the sky, the clouds, just because they're beautiful anyway. But I'm also, in the back of my mind, also looking for anything that might be unusual in the sky. Sometimes somewhat hopefully. But that's always been with me from a very early age.
Yes.
The first books I was reading at school were all UFO books, pretty much apart from Asterix books and things like that. But I was reading those UFO books very early. Numerous films influenced me greatly as well. So when I saw Star Wars, for example, as a child, that blew my mind. That absolutely blew my mind. The cantina scene in Star Wars, when you've got all those different aliens hanging around the bar having a drink, to me, made so much sense. I thought that there must be places in the universe out there where that actually does happen and it occurs, and humans aren't at that level yet to be able to partake in that, despite the Star Wars having humans in that. So that really appealed to me and opened my mind in a great way to think that there's all this variety of other little creatures out there that must exist. Even things like Jim Henson's work, you know, that sort of stuff as well. And even down to the Muppets, for example, like these entities that have got sort of look different to us, but they have they're smart asses or whatever, but they've got personalities, or they're from a fantasy background. The Dark Crystal, all that type of stuff really fired up my imagination as a child. So I'd always been interested in that. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, all that type of thing from a very young age had got me interested in other possibilities, other realms, and that there must be other creatures out there in this great wide world, and we're not living in some unique little bubble here that is in any way unique, because I personally believe that the universe is teeming with life. I think it's jam-packed with life, and because it's so big and so spread out and so far apart, and perhaps that's a good thing, you know, the ability to interact can only be achieved once you reach a certain level. So, but once I got into adulthood, did work, got a life gets in the way, UFOs went to the background to a certain extent, and you get all these other things happening in your life, but it's always there. It's always whispering over your shoulder, hey, there's a UFO book, there's an old UFO book, there's a documentary you haven't seen, just watch that, just buy that, just get that, do this. And so it's always there. Whenever I had a moment growing up and into adulthood, I'd always had that, maintain that interest. And then when I got into and I had UFO experiences as well, but then when I got into my 40s, I thought, well, it's now or never. Like, I would really like to get involved in this phenomenon, and I joined MUFON. And I did that because MUFON was basically all I had sort of really had heard of at that point. But MUFON is like looking over your neighbour's fence at a party that you're not invited to, because basically it's in the US, and it's a very much a US-based organisation. And from Australia, it's pretty hard to get a great deal of active involvement in MUFON. So I thought I'll look locally. So I looked around locally, and I found a guy in Melbourne called George Simpson who was having little meetings down in Chelsea. And I drove 3 hours from Bairnsdale, where I live, 3 hours east of Melbourne, down to go to his meetings. I met another man there who was trying to get another UFO group off the ground, Andrew Arnold, creating Victorian UFO Action. And he,
on your shirt?
On my shirt, as per my shirt,
yes.
www.vufoa.com,
yes.
Seeking the Truth. So I met up with Andrew, and him and I got on great from the outset, and I think he could see in me and I could see in him things that was just kind of like that, you know, that McCartney-Lennon type of a thing, you know, where we're going to be able to help each other here. So we then sort of started organising and trying to get a group together. So that's how I kind of got involved from the very early age right through until, you know, having had a couple of experiences, and then actively becoming someone who's boots on the ground, trying to achieve something for ufology in Victoria. Yeah. And I hate that word too.
Ufology?
Yeah, I hate that word. I actually prefer UFO researcher, because not many of us are actually ologists. Yes. So I find that word a little inaccurate. Yes. I think. Yeah. You know? So unless you actually have a PhD and you can't study ufology in any meaningful way to become an ologist out of it. Yeah. So therefore, be a UFO researcher.
Yeah.
That's a mini rant.
Yeah. It was a mini rant.
Off topic.
So you mentioned you'd had some encounters yourself. So what happened?
Yeah, well, look, it's like all things. I mean, from childhood, I can remember as a child, I would lay in my bed and I would look out at the stars. Most nights when they were available to look at, and I would look at the stars, and I would just imagine that there were other families up there. Going about their daily life, and this is at a pretty young age. This is at about the age of 4 or 5, and I'm sitting in my bed, and I had distinctly had these memories of looking out the window at the stars, wondering what they looked like, and I even had images of what they sort of looked like as well that were in my mind. So that was probably the first sort of point where I'd sort of had this conscious thought about, oh, look at the light out there. Perhaps there's someone else out there looking back at me, in that real kind of childhood kind of a way that a child would think about that.
I wish I had some money for every time I heard that from people.
Yeah, it's a pretty common thing. I imagine it is. I can't be the only person in the world who's had that
exactly
experience.
The same.
So that was as a child that initial feeling about others, about other non-human entities. It was very much there from a very early age. But I didn't sort of really have a real sort of my first UFO encounter until I was probably in my 30s, and I was living out in the rural areas where they often love to appear. And I went outside one night at 2 a.m, took my dog outside so he could do what dogs need to do. And I looked to the north and I saw two white solid objects pass from the north to the south as quickly as you could turn your head. And they travelled side by side, silently, from one end of the sky, as quickly as you could turn your head like that. And I thought to myself, I think I just saw UFOs. And that was the thought that went through my head at that time. And they kind of sort of had a little shimmer on them as they sort of disappeared out over the horizon. And north to south in Victoria is taking you out over ocean, basically. So you're going to either be shooting over Tasmania or out to the only place after that is Antarctica. So, and it's not a common flight path. Most of our flight paths are always east-west from Tullamarine to Auckland and New Zealand destinations where I am in that part of the world. So that was an experience that I thought, well, that's pretty strange. That's a weird experience, and it kind of gives you, confirmation that there's things happening when you have your own encounters. And the same location, I saw a little. One night I was outside on my patio, great view across the Great Dividing Range where the house was, and I saw this ball of light, and it may have been about the size of a basketball. It may have been about the size of a tractor wheel. Who knows? I'm not exactly sure what size it was. But it was just above the treetops, and it was just cartwheeling across the top of the treetops, just illuminating the top of the trees as it was kind of cartwheeling, just at a casual pace, off into the distance over the Dividing Range under a silver moonlit night. And it just disappeared. And I said to my wife at the time, "Come and look at this." So she comes out off the couch. "Oh yeah, what's that?" And goes back inside. So. But for me, I thought that was something that was really unusual, low on the ground, and in the same location I had this experience. So there were two things that I thought, well, maybe it was a min-min light or something like that. Not common in my part of the world. It's more of a Queensland phenomenon, particularly out in Western Queensland, a place called Boulia, I think. But so that was an experience. But then I had a couple of other experiences that really were on a much deeper level. So not just the witness stuff. I actually had what I call the old nighttime encounters, where one night when I was living by myself, and I was living in just a 2-bedroom unit, and it was a bright silver moonlit night, and I had the curtains open so the moonlight could come streaming in, and I remember that it was have to have been a full moon night, and I'm lying in bed and I'm laying with my face away from the windows, and during the night, I woke up with an instant start that there was someone standing next to my bed. There was someone leaning against my bed, peering over. And as I looked from this direction back over to where I was, I could see this hooded figure standing in the silhouette of the silver moonlight. And I could feel this transfer of energy that was almost like it was like tunnel sucking energy from me or something like that. It was really like it was trying to it was either trying to read me or it was trying to pull energy from me, and it was only a momentary feeling that I had that feeling. And then I I had this feeling that I was going to be stabbed. I literally felt like someone had broken into my room. It was as real as that. So it wasn't like it was a dream state. It wasn't coming out of a dream state. I was stone cold awake, and there was another presence. Like if someone walks into a room, you can feel someone walking into a room. And it was a really strong feeling of a presence standing next to the bed. And I was petrified, and I jumped up and threw the bedclothes off the bed and sat with the light on for the rest of the night. And for the next 3 nights after that, I had the hall light on. Because I didn't want this bloody thing coming back.
And how old were you, did you say?
I would have been probably about 33, 34, around that age. And then about a year later, that was okay. I was in another house, and I was playing basketball outside one Saturday morning, and I just had a feeling like I was being watched, like a neighbour was looking at me over the fence. And I turned around, grabbed the basketball, I turned around, and then here's this black shape standing next to my car. And it was a black, inky shape, as black as the microphone stand, pure black, standing next to the car. And I just stopped and looked at it, and then it glided around the car, and I sort of came down towards it, and it glided across, and it went down the back of my shed, this black shape. And the black shape had almost like sparkles coming around the outside of it, and it was like someone had taken a sliver of night and just put it into the daylight, and it was just that black.
And what shape was it exactly?
It was kind of like just a straight shape, like sort of like that type of a shape, and it went around the back of the shed, and I went down the other side of the shed to try and intersect it, and then it was gone. And I thought to myself, that was a strange experience too, during the daylight hours, not sort of at night time when people can sort of say, yeah, no, you just had a bad dream. But this was in daylight, broad daylight, and I could see this type of thing. So that was a strange experience too. And I don't know how to classify either of those two experiences. I've tried to talk about them in alien terminology. Then I don't know that it actually was aliens. I don't. Maybe it was some type of other type of an entity out there. You know, I like to use the dramatic term soul sucker, something like that, or who knows what. It could have been an Aboriginal spirit, for all I know. So I don't know what it was that I encountered, but they were definitely experiences that for me were my own personal experiences. Then other times when me and my partner Lana had been out looking for UFOs, just consciously going out one night to a particularly remote location. We drove out there, we drove around, we almost got lost and bogged and all those things, and we came back without seeing anything. And then when we came back into just a minute from town, we saw this fluorescent tube of light just appear in the sky below the clouds, and illuminated the clouds, and then it disappeared. And we both saw it with our own eyes. We were quite puzzled as to what that was too. So
it was a tube of light where it was cut off at the ends, was it?
Yeah, it was kind of like it had sort of. We weren't sure whether it went like that or whether it went like that, but it appeared for what we would say probably maybe 3 to 4 seconds, and it wasn't lightning, because there was no lightning activity on that particular night. There were just the big cotton ball clouds in the sky. It was below the sky deck or the cloud deck, and it illuminated the clouds from the bottom. And we were really puzzled as to what we had seen on that particular night too. We don't know what it was, but we can only describe it really as a tube of white light that was there, and then it was gone. So whether it was coming and passing from somewhere to somewhere else, who knows? Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about the hooded bee, but I just want to go back a little bit to when you said you came outside that time and you saw something in the sky, and your wife at the time came out and went, oh yeah, what is that? And then walked back inside. Now that's really common for some people to go, what is that? And have that inquiring mind and want to pursue it more.
Yeah.
And other people just discard it, even though it's something that they may never have seen before.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah,
and that was that situation.
Yeah, so with UFO reports, for example, do you think that we know that not everyone reports what they see, but do you think an element of that is also because people just unconsciously or consciously just discard it, what they see?
I think that's quite true, and some people can see some really extraordinary things.
Yes.
We're not just talking about a light bobbling across the sky. I mean, this could have been something on the ground with creatures running around, and they can still not want to talk about that, and perhaps it does get discarded. It's really very interesting point. And I always had the thought that, you know, Godzilla could have walked past and she probably would have done the same thing.
Yes.
You know?
So they sort of fit into that box of, just one of those things.
Just one of those things.
And then you have just one of those things and another one of those things, and then you get people who come forward and then start to say, you know what, you know, look at all this history of it. Do you find that with people who talk to you?
Yeah, I do. They
find
go,
something's a bit, maybe there's not just one of those things after all.
I think that's what you'll find, and you'll get people who we discussed this earlier. They will report the one thing to you, and then there is a history of others. Now that I think about it,
yes,
there's been other weird things that have happened in my life, and I can't quite explain what this pattern is that's occasionally occurring. Because one thing I can say from my own personal experiences is, I could go and stare at the sky night after night after night and see absolutely nothing other than satellites floating around out there, the International Space Station, and Jetstar flights to Auckland. And that's if I'm going out there consciously looking for something. But if I'm taking my bins out or doing something really mundane, that's when this type of phenomena manifests itself. For me personally, my own personal experience has been, it's never manifested itself at my will or command. It's always occurred at those times when you are least expecting something to happen. And even when Lana and I went out looking purposefully for UFOs in a UFO area with the intent of seeing one, and we didn't see anything at that location, but we did on the way home. So it's really, really, really interesting. Yeah.
With your experience of seeing the hooded beings, I've come across people who, it's not rare, but it's not common. And it also comes up in people who have near-death experiences, seeing those hooded beings. And I just wonder, could you make any sort of, do you see a crossover there at all in that sort of situation?
Yeah, I totally see it. I do see a crossover in that situation, because these guys are almost kind of like shadow beings, is kind of, and if people want a visual of what I saw, you just have to think of the Black Riders in Lord of the Rings. That was what it kind of looked like, a Black Rider, and it kind of had that Black Rider energy when the worms turn up in the ground and all that sort of stuff. Like, it had that kind of a feel to it. So it really was a strong presence that was there. Yes, I could easily see how that would be a crossover experience, that perhaps upon reaching a death scenario where you are leaving the physicality and the confines of your physical body behind, and you are perhaps entering kind of into that other realm where entities like this and God knows maybe a myriad of other ones can potentially all of a sudden be perceived by you in a very clear and real way, whereas, and that's in that situation when you are passing to another area. But if you are actually, if they're coming to you into this world, into this realm, for whatever reason that is, then I can see definitely see a correlation between going there and them coming here for God knows what agendas.
So I guess in reality we don't really, we call it the UFO phenomenon because that enables us to talk about these strange experiences, and there's been a long history of people saying that that's generally extraterrestrial in nature. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it can be other things? Or?
Absolutely. I even though I'm a nuts and bolts UFO researcher who kind of demands evidence for this phenomenon as much as I can possibly find it, I rarely call anything that comes across my desk or across my email an alien spaceship. I'm not prepared to stand up and say that, aha, there it is, that's the alien spaceship that we've all been looking for. There it is, that's the one. That's one right there. And that's it. I'm not prepared to make that call at any point in time because I don't know where it's come from. I don't know why it's here. I haven't spoken to its pilots. They haven't come down and said to me, Ben, hi Ben, we're here for this particular reason, just FYI, and off they go. I haven't had that experience, so until I get that level of experience, I can't sit there and say that this is an alien spacecraft or it's from another dimension, it's time travelers from the future, or a combination of those type of possibilities. It certainly is. It is some type of either advanced technology or advanced type of an intelligence that is interacting with us here, and it appears magical to us. because we come from a lot more primitive background, and I know people don't. That's probably unpopular in the 21st century to say that we are primitive, but I still believe in certain areas and ways we are still very much a primitive, not far from the cavemen. Really, we haven't come that far from the cavemen perhaps in a spiritual evolved way, or in our ability to perceive and interact with these other intelligences from other areas. We still are very, and perhaps that's why they treat us with caution. Perhaps that's why they aren't. There's people say, well, where are they? And I'll say, well, that's the reason why.
But while you feel you can't say that they're extraterrestrial, there are witnesses who will say that.
That's right, they will. Yeah.
Because they've got ground traces and marks on their body, and they claim to have interaction and information from those extraterrestrial beings. How do you deal with that? How do you reconcile that with your? Well, I'm not ready to go there yet. Yeah,
that's right. It is a. Well, when I say I'm not really ready to go there yet, it's kind of more the fact that if the evidence is pointing very strongly in that direction, then yeah, I would be happy to sort of go, well, this is a really great case, and it perhaps does suggest that there is. Finally, we've found something that is. But for the person who's had that experience, that's a completely different story.
Yes.
And as an investigator, you have to treat that with respect to how A, they feel about it. B, you can only ever look at it from an outsider in. You weren't there. You weren't part of that experience. So you have to bear that in mind, and you have to sort of you have to kind of walk in other people's shoes as an investigator without sort of being too autocratic about that's. Okay, yeah, it might be an alien experience, it might not. There's some pretty compelling evidence, but you still have to be open-minded, I think, is really what I'm trying to say. But it would take a lot for me, say, based on perhaps photographic evidence or something like that, purely alone, to say that is a alien spacecraft. You need as much information around it as you can, and even when you do have all the information, still may not give you everything that you need to know to make a call like that.
Yeah. But you've touched briefly on something I was wondering about, like having a healthy scepticism as an investigator / researcher.
Yeah.
How important is that?
I think it's very important to be open-minded and sceptical. And I think you need both in equal dose. I think if you're leaning too far one way, either as a skeptic, then that's basically got blinkers on, and you're almost becoming a debunker, which is another thing altogether. But then if you're also a little bit too willing to believe, then you're kind of opening yourself up to believing in Santa Claus to a certain extent. So it really is important to go, okay, I believe and I'm open-minded. I'm prepared for anything. I'm actually prepared for anything. And I do struggle with that. I do struggle with some things that I hear, and I sort of got to go, do I, can I, I have to be open-minded about that. And I think you cannot be involved in UFO research and not be prepared to hear any number of what may on the surface appear to be, really wild ideas or perhaps experience. You need to be prepared to be able to accept the potential reality of that. But you also need to be able to see, well, I'm not just going to accept what someone says at face value either.
Yes.
So,
So you've got to keep the space in your own mind.
You do.
For new things to find a home.
To grow. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I'm just a little guy. I don't have all the answers or anywhere near the answers. But I have to be open-minded enough to let my pathways open to accept new possibilities, particularly if there is some type of support for that as well. And which is very difficult with this for witnesses, because a lot of witnesses say it came down, they jumped out, they did that, they ran around, it did this and everything like that, and then they all done, and then they took off. Well, where's the evidence? Well, they didn't leave anything behind.
Yes.
And it actually happened. Well, it doesn't leave an investigator a lot to work with. You can be impressed with their sincerity, that they believe that's what happened. They have a belief that that's what happened, and then you probably kind of have to accept that they believe that that's what happened. But did that actually happen?
Yes.
That's the harder question. It's a different story between their belief and what the facts were. It may well have happened.
Yeah.
But they didn't leave anything. Beings could materialise through these walls right now, walk through here, they could put us all to sleep, and we might have some small conscious memory that actually occurred, and perhaps start to come up for us about these beings that came into this room right now. But they go out of here, and then we try to tell other people, these shadows came in through the walls and they did things to us and off they went. Where's the evidence of that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I always say that the UFO phenomenon is like trying to grab water. It really is. You're trying to grab a handful of water. It just can't be done, and it really is like that. And it's always evolving and changing, and it's a real...
Well, it's a real issue for UFO research, because our society really is based on anecdotal evidence.
Yes.
You know, we've had our religion based on anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
We have our politics is based on anecdotal evidence,
That's right.
To a degree.
To a degree, yeah.
And even witness testimony and accidents and traffic accidents and all those things. Anecdotal evidence is prolific in any sort of culture, because that's how we communicate information to each other. It's when you take it out of that box to move it into evidence, and that's what you're talking about for you.
Yeah.
What is it that for you that would sort of allay any sort of questions in your mind about what a person has just described to you?
Well, yeah, that's real. Sincerity does go a long way for me. Like if I've taken the time to listen to someone's story, let them tell it. First of all, put my beliefs down on the table, and then just let them tell me the tale as to what actually happened. If that can happen, and I can do that, then you know I'm almost happy to accept their word if I feel that it's that, and still a judgment. I realise that. And that's going to depend on how well I think they can deliver that to me. So there's still judgments around that. It doesn't mean the experience didn't happen just because I'm not sure. You know, so I'm still judging people regardless, even when I do take off my pre-prescribed beliefs and put them down, or consciously try to do that. Sincerity is a thing. If it's told in a fluid kind of a way, for me, that's also compelling as well. If it's so told like it, and then it did this, and then that happened, and then this happened, and blah 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 blah. I can sort of kind of, and then you can test them at any point in the story, and the story is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Then I think that's also compelling.
Yeah.
For lack of actual evidence. You know, the beings went back into the walls, they disappeared, there was nothing left. Well, what can we do? Well, we've only got the witness, and I always say to investigators, we only have witnesses, we don't have aliens. Okay, and we don't have their hardware. We only have people. We can only interview people. So therefore, let's be sure that we know how to interview people.
Yes.
That we know how to talk to people. We know how to gain their trust. We know how to listen to them with an open mind. But we can also critically review the information that comes back.
Yes.
And we have to ultimately make a judgment, I suppose. But let's at least see where the story, the way in which it's presented, and where that leads us to.
Yes, yeah. With cases, because you're here in Brisbane to talk about Victorian cases, is there one particular case for you that stands out that you can say, wow, that's just a doozy, like, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
And it just knocks you on the head.
Yeah.
What is it?
There's probably about 10, but...
Yes, can you pick a couple?
But if I had to pick one, I would go the Rosedale UFO incident from 1980. That for me is one of the best UFO cases, and it was one of Paul Norman's favourite as well. The head of VUFOA. That case was it had practically everything. On this particular night, and Rosedale is a small farming community in East Gippsland in the pointy end of Victoria, about probably 2 hours out of Melbourne. So it's out in the countryside, and this farmer George Blackwell was woken up one night at 1 a.m. by all the cows and all the animals going absolutely crazy. The cows were stampeding around in the paddocks. He had a horse, and the horse was whinnying and stamping and absolutely going crazy. And his first thought was that there was cattle rustlers out in the paddock. So he gets up, goes outside, stands on the veranda and has a look. And he sees this object flying from the west to the east, travelling low across the top of the cypress trees, across the top of the shearing shed, and go out into the distant paddock. And he thought it was a plane crashing. He thought there was something weird in the sky. So he quickly gets dressed, hops on his little farmer's bike, and puts out to a point where there was a gate. And beyond that gate, there was a water tank. And this object, which has got lights on it, flies out and it hovers above the water tank. And it then basically lands on top of the water tank. And it's sitting on top of the water tank, and he's watching this thing from sitting on his little farmer's bike. Then the UFO lifts off the tank, flies a short distance away, and lands on the ground, and it starts rotating. and basically it sends out a pulse, and he is overcome with a type of an illness and feels very, very sick, very, very weak. It then lifts off the ground, and cow pats are falling off it, and then it flies off to the east. The next day he's very sick, and he was a farm manager, not the farm owner, and the farm owner comes around and finds him in bed, and he's really, really, really weak and really not feeling very well. And he tells her, I had this really weird thing happen last night, you know, and the cows are still running around. The cows are still spooked and panicked out in the paddock. And out in the paddock is this circular impression on the ground next to the water tank. And the water tank is drained completely dry. And all the silt in the bottom of the water tank is spiralled up into a point about 1/2 metre high in the bottom of this tank. And he said he had checked the tank the day before, and the tank was completely full of water. So overnight, this water has been drained from the tank. The stock ran around for a week. The stock was really rattled by this and spooked. And there's other UFO experiences where cows have had extended reactions to interactions. The horse had bolted off, and an old cow had tried to get into a shed that it was just bashing to get into a shed. So these animals were petrified. He was sick for 5 days. His watch had stopped at 1 a.m. The time of the incident, his watch had stopped. So without going into too much more, that's an example to me of a case that really does stand up. And I was about 11 years old at the time, so I had no hope of being involved in investigating any of that. But that's an example of a case where you've got a witness who got no interest in UFOs. They wouldn't have even thought about them. He's just a farmer doing his job. No capacity for flights of fancy. And even if he did, there's physical evidence there that backs that story up. Scared and frightened stock, empty water tanks, swirling marks on the ground where the grass is dead for extended periods of time afterwards. All of that points to something actually happening. And it's a strong evidence-based case to a witness who would be salt of the earth type of a person.
Yes, yeah. We don't get a lot of reports like that these days.
No.
Do you have any idea or any thoughts on why we don't get as many of those cases?
I scratch my head all the time as to why we don't get those sort of cases, because in that area there were other water tanks drained and lagoons drained, and it happened extensively in the early 1980s when I was a child. No damn good. And even back into the 70s and the 60s there was extensive history of landing locations around Victoria where you could actually go out and do some physical work. So why is it not happening now? I think that whoever was visiting us over those periods of time perhaps doesn't need to do that work now. I think that work's been done. For whatever that reason is. I don't think we're about to see an armada of invasion ships turn up here at any point in time at all. Because I firmly believe that if that was the agenda, it would have happened by now. You know, I don't think any of these entities want to come into our world and enslave us and make us build pyramids. So I don't see that as being a reality. But I think that now the phenomenon has moved away from that to a certain extent, because they don't need to do that now. They've been on the ground, they've tested the soil, they've taken the stock, they've taken the water, they've taken the humans. They've possibly now, in this time, so over the preceding 30, 40 years, that's what that history was. Now we're moving into something else. We're seeing a different sorts of craft in the sky now, more perhaps entity-based, perhaps more life form based craft are appearing and being captured in photographs and things like that. Maybe this is that evolution process in UFOs again. Maybe this whole idea of nuts and bolts craft is taking other steps and taking other forms. Perhaps as quickly as we humans are advancing, maybe aliens are advancing just as far. Maybe they're not that far ahead of us. Maybe it's only a short gap between them and us, but it's enough to seem like magic to us.
Or maybe it's a different group that are here.
Maybe it's a different group that are here. That's right. Well, exactly right. There's, if you look at humanoid encounters around the world, there literally is a Star Wars cantina plethora of every type of creature you could possibly imagine, from jelly blobs to Bigfoots to little grey guys and reptilians and mantis beings and anything else you can think of under the universe. They've all been here. So for some reason we don't know how you get here. and some of these other creatures seem to can just appear and disappear, and so however they're doing it, we haven't discovered that.
Yeah.
But that's very true. Maybe at this point in time there are other types of creatures, entities, intelligences coming here that were different to what they saw in the past.
Well, we talked yesterday, I think, about beings that have the possibility of being both physical and non-physical.
That's correct.
It sort of answers a lot of questions about some cases. Well, if they could do both, then yes, that would answer why they can do this X, Y, Z. So
that's very true.
Yeah. So we need to keep opening our minds up to like you said, keeping that open-mindedness and.
You have to.
Yeah, to be able to, because the phenomenon seems to be responsive. It seems to be responsive as well.
Yes.
So there seems, and I don't know what that means really. I've still. What you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there seems to be a fluidity to it. It's almost like the phenomenon can have some sort of resonance to us, and it shapeshifts. And it weaves in amongst with humans over time. The Romans described shields in the sky, and things are always referred to in the vernacular of the day, and the perception is set against a belief system of the day. So the Romans saw flaming shields in the sky. No one sees flaming shields in the sky anymore. And even when you look at from the contactee era from the 50s, having cups of tea on Saturn and that sort of stuff, from that type of experience, through to these horrible little grey beings stealing people from their beds in the middle of the night. So those evolutions that have occurred through, from solid nuts and bolts craft, some of them, and going back to the late 1800s when you had these chitty chitty bang bang type flying objects appearing over North America as a phenomenon at that point in time. So the phenomenon seems to be able to make itself appear like a technology at the time that the people of that time can relate to, but it's still out of their grasp at that particular period in time. So if they had rocked up with the chitty chitty bang bang ships in the 21st century, we would be going, these guys haven't come very far.
Yes.
Look at us, we've got FA-18s and all these other great craft. But the phenomenon seems to be able to be that one step, or perhaps light years ahead of us in that perception. And perhaps the other reason why that's here too is the fact that since the nuclear age, maybe we are being shown, guys, you really are just you're dangerous first and foremost. You're incredibly dangerous to yourselves. You can't be trusted with matches, right? Your bombs are impacting on our dimensions. So you go, drop hydrogen bombs out in the Pacific atolls and underground in Russia. That has impacts for other entities in other places. You guys are dangerous. You are aggressive. That's how we would be perceived. And it's not too much for me to think that perhaps in the 20th century, particularly since the atomic age, that we have been shown that, well, hang on a minute, there are more advanced. You still are primitive. You're not far out of the trees. So you're only 2 million years out of the trees. We've been around as a civilization for 10 million years. And we can do this. And I think perhaps there's a little bit of that too, that maybe we are shown a taste of what could happen, but at the same time we haven't been annihilated by another intelligence for our potential danger, because we can't be trusted.
But do you think that we have, like in regard to alien abduction experiences, for example, which were prolific during the 1990s particularly, do you think that perhaps we could have been, or the human DNA could have actually been a resource for some of these beings from elsewhere?
Definitely. I mean, and same with animals too. I mean, there might be certain DNAs and structures, or any of that type of thing that they might need our physical matter for different reasons. Like maybe they've depleted their own, as an example. Maybe the bodies aren't holding the brains, for example.
Or if they're planetary gardeners, populating other places.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, seeding other places. So it's kind of like we're coming in, we're grabbing humans and animals and Noah's Ark type of thing. let's grab some of this stuff and take it over there because they need it there, and they could be. That's right. They could be some type of a universal management system that we're not a part of, a council perhaps.
Well, I've had a pet theory about that. That perhaps human DNA, because of where we're located, I don't really know, but we're maybe in the backwash of the galaxy, and because we haven't, or any civilization that actually hasn't become spacefaring yet. Perhaps their DNA is less diffused, cosmically speaking, and maybe it's our DNA has a particular advantage to some other civilization, and they come here and take samples of that. Must have enough by now. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think that our energy is very primordial, and I think that our energy is very strong. And I think that if you have evolved in other ways, and perhaps you are slightly less physical in your evolution, maybe they can see that they need some of the more primordial DNA. Let's call it organic. To enhance themselves, to bring themselves, to give them some. Maybe they need us to visit us. Who knows? I mean, that might be part of it as well. Maybe if you are in another realm and you don't have a physical body, maybe you need some aspect of a physical body to become a physical body. I don't know. That's a possibility as too. I'm grabbing water.
Yes, I know. Aren't we all?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I just want someone to come down and put their arm around me and sit me down and say, this is what's going on.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
This is it. This is what's happening. This is what. Oh, thank you so much.
It's not going to be the government, is it?
No, well, the governments. Yeah, that's exactly right. Governments will like to keep their people, uninformed and scared. So that's pretty much never going to change.
So, what do you think about disclosure?
Well, I mean, it's
with a capital D.
With the capital D word. Look, it's interesting. It really is. I think that that yes, potentially we have all been conditioned for a very long period of time since the even from War of the Worlds and the early movies, and science fiction has been a very strong part of our culture, and UFOs are a strong part of our culture, and you can't escape it. And what I love about UFOs is the fact that you might ask me about the weekend's golf results, couldn't tell you. Don't have an opinion on it. You ask me about UFOs, and you ask anyone, they'll have an opinion on it. They'll either say yes, no, or maybe. But ask me about the golf, I wouldn't tell you. I'm not interested in it. I'm not saying golf's not interesting, but for me personally, I'm not interested in it. So the universality of UFOs is very compelling. Every human on the planet will have an opinion on it. Every human, whether they even think about it or not, will have, at some point in time, perhaps is asked that question, standing around the fire pit with a stubby in your hand. So, mate, you reckon there's anything up there? That sort of stuff happens all the time.
So, you seem to have an interest in cold cases.
I do have a big interest in cold cases, yeah.
What is it about that draws you to it?
Okay. So many cool events have occurred in the past. Stuff that'll make your toes curl. Really good cases have occurred. They're only recorded in yellowing newspaper articles, old feathery fool's cap reports that were written 30, 40 years ago. There's no record of this stuff out there for anyone to read. They are in old archives, scattered files, and basically people or the public or anyone who might spark an interest in the topic cannot go and look at any of this information. And I don't think you can make any semblance of an opinion about UFOs if you haven't studied the past. And I think the past can teach us potentially what's happening now and in the future. If you have no past information, then you really can't make any judgment about anything. If you didn't know that in 1966 these particular events occurred, or in 1978 that a pilot went disappeared, you could walk down the street here in Brisbane and with a little microphone and do a vox pop and say, who's Fred Valentich? Have you heard of Fred Valentich? Have you heard Fred Valentich? You could probably ask 10 to 20 people and not have a single person have ever heard of Fred Valentich or Kelly Cahill or any of these particular cases, because what happens with UFO cases is they might make media for a short period of time, then they just disappear. It all just disappears. So, and you're finding that you've got these great cases that people perhaps today should be just as interested in as if they had occurred yesterday, because what happened is really, really good. I'm not talking about lights in the sky, guys. I'm talking about stuff where there's been really serious stuff going on. That's the stuff that I think we need to ensure that we digitise, that we keep those old records, that we preserve that stuff, we archive it, and only if you're interested, only if you can be bothered to have that available for people to read. Books need to be written about UFOs of the past, so that new generation, millennials who now don't care about it, they're all interested in Snapchat and selfies, but at some point down the track they might actually become interested and look out at the stars like I did and other people do and go, oh, I wonder what's happened out there. And if a young child sort of had that sort of experience and showed that interest in it, I would do everything in the world to encourage a child to look at that. Schools don't have programs for, as far as I know, for discussing other entities or that sort of stuff. We talk about Jesus and things like that, but at a Christian school, but we won't talk about little green men in any realistic way. And another thing I've thought about is there perhaps should be some type of a schools program for children to be able to start thinking about this sort of stuff, because if young people start thinking about it, and UFOs are interested in children, they certainly are. They appear over schools. In the UFO record, there's quite a few cases where UFOs have appeared in school areas. So the occupants of UFOs are interested in our children, and I'm not saying that in any sinister kind of a way, but they have an interest in our children, and I think our children should have an interest in them. So
there's also a benefit, I think, with cold cases, is that you can go back and look at them with 21st century eyes now, and in the times when they happened, they didn't have that. We weren't thinking the same way about the subject then as we were.
That's right.
And I think that, like, one case that I remember that we looked at happened in Brisbane at West End, and it was in the 60s. And there was a case, it seemed to be where someone had taken a series of photos, and they said this happened at a certain time, but when the photos were actually analysed, the photos were 3 hours out of step. Now today we're looking at missing time. But in those days, the investigators, who happened to be the president of this association, who's now deceased, but he said, oh no, it's rubbish, and he discarded it because we didn't know about missing time then.
No.
Or the possibility of
missing
it, right?
Time,
So I think there's an advantage to go back and have a look at them, because there's things that people might have missed. Have you found that when you've looked at those cases?
110%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Every time we do a cold case investigation and we dig up an old witness, or we go to a location, we always find out some new information that hasn't been previously recorded in previous recordings of what actually happened at that particular time. So it may not even be overly earth-shattering stuff, but it's still stuff that's relevant to the case. For example, that you just didn't know that actually had happened, and by going back and talking to these people, you can see that yes. And the other important point I want to make is the fact that if you are preserving the UFO history, and you see that a UFO landed here in 1948, and then there was another sighting in 1952, another one was there in 1968, another one in 1972, you can see that, well, maybe this area actually does have some type of attraction and history that is actually there. People say to me, where do UFOs appear? And I say UFOs appear everywhere.
Yes.
And that might sound like some nutty fruitcake kind of a response, and that I need to be certified. But if you actually go back and look at the historical data in any state of Australia, and I can relate to Victoria primarily, every region of Victoria has UFO history.
Yes.
So they appear in Melbourne, they appear in Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, Albury, Wodonga, East Gippsland, Mildura, and every little place in between. There are areas and pockets where there are more UFO sightings more frequently. The Golden Triangle in Victoria is a great place for UFOs. There's a strong UFO history in the Ballarat, Bendigo, Goldfield area. Strong UFO history there. Gippsland, strong UFO history. The Mornington Peninsula side of Melbourne has a really strong UFO history. So if we don't preserve these cases, if we don't have them there so that you can historically go back and look at an area, you just can't. It can help to provide some sort of an extended story about the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah, it's like they've always been here. Perhaps they always will.
Perhaps they will. That's right. Exactly.
People have always reported them throughout history. And
well, Aboriginals
places.
do too.
Yeah.
You know, there's strong Aboriginal cases, and I think that the Aboriginals, you know, particularly, have probably had quite a strong connection to other entities and have the ability to access that. You know, I think in our modern day society we're very closed off. It's a humans are a lot more closed now than they were in the past, and you talk about the ancient aliens scenarios and that type of stuff, and you know, I can accept certain parts of that theory, but not all of it, not everything that they expound about. But you know, there are certainly connections to the past that have been there for a really long period of time. It's not just a modern phenomenon. It's been with humanity for the entire time of our existence. I'm sure we're being monitored, perhaps maybe through our entire existence, which perhaps in other places is a really short period of time. You know, it's only a perception of time. I mean, perhaps we live for a short 80, 90 years as humans. Maybe other entities live for thousands of years. Yeah. Thousands of years. Maybe they're 12,000 years old or 100,000 years old. Who knows? You know, we have bodies that deteriorate for all sorts of reasons, and maybe they're living in a way that doesn't happen.
Where do you think we are with the UFO phenomenon? Where are we? You know, what do we know? And where do we go from here?
Well, here in your lovely house, we've got an extensive library of what everybody else has ever thought about the UFO phenomenon. So it's been written about extensively for the last 50 years. There are a unlimited number of exhaustive books, journals, series of discussions about the UFO phenomenon. Where are we? Have we actually come anywhere as a result of that? I don't think we've come that far. I really, and a lot of people maybe not like a statement like that you know, oh yes, we understand a lot more about now what's happened, and perhaps there are people who know or think they know, and if someone always tells me they know, I'm kind of a bit suspicious of them, because you know, I just can't sort of accept that in that sort of way. But how far have we actually come? Look, I think now I think for the first part of the 20th century, I think people have woken up to the possibility of it. I think that generally most people out there now have got an opinion on it. Most people probably generally accept that, yeah, they probably do exist. And whereas in the earlier part of the century we were investigating it as investigators, they were trying to present the evidence forward. They were trying to show that yes, this is a real phenomenon. I think we've moved past that now. I think those days are over. I think the Blue Book era, from the, you know, that era to the 60s, and then, you know, Hollywood's helped a lot too with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., movies like that, and a million other movies have made people aware and talk about it, and it's more conscious. But how far have we actually come? What has our understanding reached? It's such a fractious phenomenon that there's so many different aspects to it that maybe we know something down certain pathways, maybe we know less down other pathways. I think that's where we're at. I think it's a kaleidoscope of different levels of information. But ultimately, have we come that far from the guys who were researching it 40 years ago? I don't think we really have at this point in time. Yeah,
there's been a release of files in various countries and
attitudes
international
have relaxed.
archives, and you're not going. The ridicule factor's dropped.
That's correct.
And now it's quite good.
And I think what I didn't answer for you was disclosure. You know, like the US government is all eyes are on the US government to come forward and say, well, people, we have been lying to you all this time. There actually are these guys out there. Well, there's no reason why the Russians couldn't do the same thing. There's no reason why the Chinese couldn't do the same thing. So I don't think all the pressure is necessarily on the United States to have some massive... Like, they own the phenomenon, because they certainly don't own the phenomenon. You know, multiple governments around the world could potentially flower out with this information about what's happened in their countries. You know, France has a wonderful... UFO history and a really scientific approach to it in France. They take it seriously over there. They really do, and they put in a really good effort over there in their UFO research. So, will we see it? I don't think the governments are going to release information if they don't have to. So what would force their hand? What would force the government into making a disclosure statement? We haven't had to say anything before.
Yeah.
So why all of a sudden do we have to say it now?
Yeah.
There has to be some type of a reason for them to do so. And there's all sorts of credible people around, and that is there. But unless they have to, why would they?
Yes, exactly.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
You know, unless they have to say something, as in, like, yes, there is an invasion armada sitting out behind Jupiter, and we should have told you a while ago, but they're coming.
Yes.
You know, unless we're in that situation, I can't see why they would. Why would they come forth and tell us what they know? Why would they? Have they told us anything else?
No, they haven't, have they? No.
There's no reason for them to release these secrets. Governments won't do anything unless they have to.
Yes.
And I can't think of a reason why they would have to disclose what they know about other entities.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't see it. Feel free to disagree. But that's how I see it.
Oh, I think that's so true. Yeah. But on a lighter note, you attended I want to give the Cardwell UFO Festival a plug because it's in Queensland particularly.
Yeah.
But you attended that last year.
Yes.
And I think it was their third year that they'd had the UFO.
Yes.
It's the only UFO festival in Australia.
The only one.
Yes.
Very
and
unique.
how did you find it?
Get to Cardwell.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. Get to Cardwell. Go. You'll be glad you did. It's you've got to support a small town.
Yes.
And the people that are actually putting these events together, because it takes time, effort, money to put these events into place. And they did a superb job up there.
Yes.
There was something for everybody at Cardwell.
Yeah.
You could go there and ride on rides. You could go shop it and buy a dream catcher. You could attend the C5 discussions and get into the nitty-gritty about UFOs. You could buy food. They had a big party on the Saturday night where you could come dressed as your favourite alien and dance to the best cover band I've ever seen in my life.
Yes.
It's a great event.
Well, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you for talking to us and spending time with us.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and tune in again. Thanks.